Welcome to the BPM 360 podcast. I'm Russell.
And I'm Caspar. And together we will help you navigate the treacherous waters of the BPM adoption journey. I hope you enjoy the podcast.
Good morning, dear listeners. Welcome to another episode of the BPM 360 podcast. My name is Caspar, and as always, I am joined by Russell. My friend, how are you today?
Good morning, Caspar. It's
Good morning.
a great day. I'm feeling great.
Cool.
We haven't talked for quite some time, so I'm looking forward to repeat the session. We used to have like a bit of a contingent. We had a couple of episodes that we could publish. We're running a bit dry, so we need to catch up some episodes. So I'm happy that we can dig in, and we found some time because you're a busy man.
We all are, I guess. But you're absolutely right. It's travel season right now. Welcome everybody to what I would call the pink and burgundy episode. For those people who will catch this on YouTube later on, you see that completely without any form of alignment, we are wearing similar colored polo shirts today.
Yeah, actually, there's an anecdote to this one here.
Tell me.
I got this. I was in Dublin the first time, and I went
Really?
to visit.
Doesn't say that on the shirt.
No, well, it says Guinness.
Yeah, it says Dublin.
So it's not there. I went to a pub last week.
Yeah. I went to Dublin, and this T-shirt is all I got.
And that was the Irish Global Partner meeting that was organized.
Okay,
and
cool.
We also visited the Guinness facilities, which for the evening event. That was really cool. I think it's one of the best partner events they organized, not just because of the Guinness event. And the day, and then I was there for a couple of days, and I was on the way back to the airport. I said, "Oh my God, I've still got to buy some presents for my son and my wife." So I said, "I'm just going to told the taxi to go to the Guinness store."
Oh, cool.
They have like all the merchandising there, and then they've got some cool hoodies which my son appreciated. He didn't really know what this golden harp means, but
No, they like a hoodie.
But then I jumped in there, and they were closed only if you had like a visiting tour. So I begged this guy. I said, "Look, my family's at home. I need to get some presents, and you're the place I've come to." He said, "Okay, come on, guy."
Yeah.
And he let me in, and I spent a lot of money. I said, "Crazy merchandise. You make more money with that than with the beer." Ultimately, I bought myself more stuff than my family. One of these is this polo shirt. I said, "Oh, look, a nice bike tricot and stuff like that." And I dashed
brilliant.
off to the airport last minute, and that was good fun. It was a good event, definitely. And Dublin is a fantastic city, especially if you like pubs and pub food, and pub drinks.
So just before we kick off the main topic, I was in Munich this week. Early on, and there was a BPM meetup that was organized by a company called Process Ant. You probably might heard of them. And one of the host guys was none other than Matusz Mala from one of the three Prozessphilosophen. So I actually met him in the real life. And I had the opportunity to speak there. It was a lot of fun. You just need to imagine. We need to get something done with them as well, and they have the same idea. So we're going to make that work. We're going to have that collaboration with the Prozessphilosophen somewhere this year.
That would be great. I've been talking to him, and it's been great talking to him together with Roland. We were spinning, bouncing some ideas. So
Cool.
I was traveling as well, and one of the topics has been end-to-end workshops I've been involved in.
Oh, cool.
We'll get to that in a second. But there's one topic I also caught up around the market. That was some Fortune Business Insights saying the BPM market is going to grow from 20 billion to 70 billion by 2032. Now I was going, that's a lot of people modeling processes and documenting processes. So it boils down to the top of what the people really define as the BPM market.
Exactly.
What does that touch on?
I mean, I remember even like 10 years ago when analysts and these kind of reports talked about BPM, they very often included the whole workflow, so the BPMS part, and that of course opens up the market tremendously, because then you start looking at things like Camunda and web methods and all those kind of tools are being included. I would be surprised if in this case, when they say BPM, they also include things like mining. I mean, in that case, I would be able to understand that, let's say, that triple growth in those years. I mean, it is, but on the other hand, and I'm going to be very honest with that as well, I do see quite an uptick in interest around the process management topic.
Absolutely.
But anyway, that's something that we might want to look into and come back to in a bit more detail.
Yeah, I'll look into that, and we can maybe decompose BPM, because I mean, we're saying 360 degrees BPM. Are we focusing too much on the BPM topic from an analytics and documentation perspective? Should we take more an excursion to that? Actually. But that's maybe also specifically a topic we could take up with a Prozessphilosophen, because I think they also dig into the the workflow and the automation side. Maybe something we could also take up with some of the other partners like Darko, definitely more in the automation
that would
level.
Be interesting, yeah.
But and take that as a triggering point there.
Yeah.
But coming back to my other topic, I would
sorry about that.
No, I did the diversion. So I was traveling to customers, doing workshops, and one of the sessions I was involved in was classical end-to-end workshops. Yeah. And the interesting thing here is that they were the customer, I would say, they had a bit of a different approach than we would have recommended. So what we typically recommend is let's start off with your guardrails for the overall objectives of your program, then break it down over the operating model onto the end-to-end view and scenarios. And once you have them set up and aligned, then you know which functional department or functional area plays a role in the bigger picture. And from there, then you can go even a level deeper and get down to which solutions are in place. And do you want to set in? And then it diverts a bit from, do you need to do everything in detail, or do you say which of these processes provide services or capabilities that can be provided by standard tools like SAP, where you don't have to think twice about, but you say we take what is provided as a standard, and where do we have to deviate because we have special requirements that aren't covered just by one tool like SAP, and we have to think a bit more integrated, stuff like that. So classical top-down. Now here the customer, he had, I would say, a bit of a bottom-up design per intention or per accident. I'm not sure to say, but that's maybe so irrelevant for what I want to top on. So the people that already sat down as process experts and had thought and documented their processes, they in this context also, to a certain extent, also reflected them against the defined standard HANA system. Yeah. So they'd originally also looked at, say, some of the solution processes, but then really got down to defining, let's say, the BPMN activities across their processes. And then there came the point where they're saying, okay, but how does this all fit together? How are we going to go in direction of a UAT? What to do? And then there was this let's say, it became evident that they do need to have dedicated end-to-end sessions where they get together and then talk about it. Now, the interesting, I would say these were all senior process experts. So on the one hand, what they did on their detailed process design was good, yeah, and it was detailed as well. It wasn't just kind of like, that's what we do, but it was already they'd already invested quite some time in there. On the other hand, what I thought was also quite astonishing that in the end-to-end sessions we went about to say, okay, the classical, what kind of different business cases and scenarios do you have, looking end to end and identifying them and starting to then map out what processes for which different, like say, functional areas need to be stringed up to provide this end-to-end scenario. That really worked out fine. And it was a great session where, you know, the compliance people around GTS and the finance people around all the postings and how they, you know, the cash collection wasn't just covered as, then we do the invoicing and that's it. But they really dug in to bring in their view on what is important from the financial controlling perspective, what is really important from compliance. So you saw that the whole team was getting the understanding of the other's part in the game. So the result was, as one point, I quite like that, is that first of all, the classic, let's say, in order to cash scenario, where you typically see it from a sales logistic perspective, really presented all the details of what is happening in this integrated environment to make it happen. And it's much more complex than you think, because the amount of the times that you have to say, do a compliance check, you know, during the sales order, then during before the commissioning, and then during the delivery, you know, depending on the span of time, and the amount of tax checks and credit checks and all this, it's all running along in an integrated manner. It's astonishing what HANA does here, but it all became like visible to say, yes, but this all has to work. If anything of these links breaks, you know, we can be incompliant or we can have some serious issues. So it really, everybody understood, wow, this is quite something. What happened then, though, is we said, okay, but how do we link what you've already been doing from a process design to what we now see as the big picture of how it works together? And so then we started linking up what they already done on the detail level. And what happened is, I would say, was clearly it was going to happen to a certain extent, is that you saw that the granularity of the processes they designed didn't fit, hardly fit ever. And we were getting to the things. So the beginning and the end wasn't right. And in these processes, sometimes you need to do that, and I absolutely agree. You need to assume where you have interfaces to compliance or finance. And if you just look at this one process, you would say, yeah, it's not wrong. But then if you look at the end-to-end, you're saying, but it's not right either. Because in that session, they're like focused on their requirements, their function, and they know more or less how it works in the other areas, but they didn't get the people involved. They didn't have integration sessions, which you typically don't. So they realized, so either we ignore it or we correct it and we adjust it. And that was something where I said, so this getting the team together, understanding what you want to achieve and how things work out together, just gives such a fundamental aligned understanding, integrated understanding of how you work in an integrated manner in a company before you go into the details. So that's my strongest argument for getting people as a team to get into harmony on how you model the granularity, the integration, the big picture before going into process workshops on the detail level.
So that's an interesting one, Russell. And I have like a zillion thoughts going through my head right now, but I'll try to unravel them, a couple of them. So, I mean, I recognize the situation that you're in, and I get this question a lot from clients that's starting up. So that even if they're not as mature as the one that you describe, sometimes what you see is that they already locally started doing some process design and process modeling. And then we come to the conclusion during typically our first workshop that, well, you need to have that process hierarchy is built up top down. I mean, there's not much other that you can do. If you want to make sure that everything is aligned, and I think alignment is one of the key things that BPM provides, you need to do your hierarchy top down. And let's also be quite honest, the hierarchy for most companies is 90% the same. It's not that because you're a different company that all of a sudden you don't do purchasing anymore or you don't do HR anymore. You all do that. You all do it, and on a process hierarchy level, certainly the higher levels, is so generic that you can apply that to virtually everybody. That's why best practice frameworks are typically quite popular as a starting point. I'm not saying that you should just blindly follow them. You need to tweak and tune them typically to fit your specific situation, but 80 to 90% of that will simply be applicable. The next thing that you also need to think about is you need to, and you mentioned it already, you need to define granularity. And this is where I have the biggest, I wouldn't say issue, but this is where I very often have to contradict what companies like SAP are doing. And it's not just SAP, it's others as well. And let me see if you recognize this. There's two ways of going about defining levels in a hierarchy. Now, either you say, I have a fixed number of levels and I need to fit everything in. And that's what companies like SAP are doing. They have a level 1, 2, 3, 4, and every process on level 5 is, or level 4 is the actual business process. And regardless of how many domains and subdomains you're going to encounter along the way until you get to that single business process, that needs to be fit into 3 levels or 2 levels. And then you get, if you look at the best practice for S4, for instance, and I'm not trying to pick on SAP here, but that's just the one I work with the most, is you're going to get these concatenations of 2 subdomains, because otherwise they don't end up in the business process level in level 3 or level 4. And my view always has been, level 1 is your main domain, level 2 are your subdomains, and I don't care if that's 3 layers or 17 layers, and level 3 is your business process, period. That second layer is dynamic. And then you will end up, at least from a conceptual perspective, always on the same levels that you're talking about. But depending on the functional domain, you might have multiple level 2 layers.
There's something, let me keep your thoughts on the next one. Let me just
sure. Go ahead.
Dig directly there. So I'm driven by, so first of all, I would always say that hierarchies have to have some certain purpose. What I do not like is when people are saying, yeah, the hierarchy is a process. So it's like a main process and a sub-process. It's a hierarchy is a hierarchy. It's just like shelves.
Exactly.
That you use
I agree with that.
So principally, I would say, okay, so now, and this is something we see, that there's one reason why I always try to say, let's keep it as the hierarchy is as simple as possible. Mm-hmm. You know, APQC sometimes has 5 levels, and sometimes it has 3 or 4.
Yeah.
And this is as a classification framework, I understand. But if you're using a tool and you want to do say reporting and you want to do queries and all this, having a fixed amount of hierarchies can be super helpful.
Yeah,
and for course. Navigating, and also always knowing this is a process, everything else is hierarchy, so that you have this baseline of, for me, it's always 2 elements. I said, I have my end-to-end scenarios and I have processes. Everything else is just, let's say, structure. From a reporting perspective, I always like to have a fixed amount of levels, so you can also in the conventions and all the checks and consistency checks and reports, you have a framework where you can work through, says, there's a level missing, or this process is in the wrong hierarchy because it's being misplaced. So from a governance perspective, it makes life a hell of a lot easier. However, as an argument for what you're saying is, I do have situations where we then look at the process hierarchy and you have certain domains that have, let's say, 100 processes and others that have 2 or something like that. And then you're artificially building up a hierarchy that then, and in my case, I try to don't have 7 hierarchies because you say totally getting lost on how it's being done. But,
sure.
But then you have like, let's say the other way around, you have sometimes 2 little hierarchical levels to give these 100 processes a nice structure to cluster them in a way that it makes understandable. So there are arguments for a more flexible hierarchy, But there's also certain constraints around governance where you say, it's going to make life really hard to understand when do I have 3 and when do I have 4 layers. And ultimately, that's the other point, is that it really bugs me when people are talking about processes and processes and processes, although they're actually just hierarchies. And the real, like, I have an input and output, I have activities, and and a certain purpose, a process as per definition. It's just, it doesn't exist on these higher levels. They're just they're just like hierarchies, which is fine.
That's an interesting one, actually, and I totally agree. And for me, anything in a process hierarchy structure, for me, I typically call them domains and subdomains, because they're functional domains.
Absolutely, clusters, call them groups.
That doesn't matter what you call.
Well, the more layers you have to give them all different names.
True, but you don't call them processes, because that's the lowest level.
That's your process. The process is your process.
And I always make, and I'm going to make it again today, I'm always making the analogy with Lego. Because first and foremost, I love Lego. But imagine you have a big pile of Lego bricks, all mixed up together, and you want to build something. Then there's 2 types of people, and we're going to focus on one specific type right now. One type of people simply takes the big pile and creates whatever beautiful things out of that. Other people, most people, will sort out the pile of bricks into something that makes more sense, so they can more easily find specific bricks in the pile. Because trust me, I got 3 kids. I played with Lego a lot. Searching for that one little thing in a big pile of bricks is not what you're looking for, which is quite representative for an end user trying to find that one piece of information within an entire repository of process knowledge.
I think you should be more agile and just kind of take whatever you've got and look at it and says, how can I change the design to make this process?
I know that there's apps out there that can scan a pile of Lego bricks and find exactly what is in there and give you ideas of what to build with it.
But you're right. Hierarchy and is sorting things to make them available.
Just to finish up that thing, the thing you're doing with sorting out Lego bricks is basically you're taking like 17 different shoeboxes, so that you can actually say, okay, all the red one goes in that one, all the blue ones go there, all the roof tiles go there, all the wheels go there. And at the end, what are you ending up with? You're ending up basically with a couple of big boxes containing smaller boxes containing Lego bricks, which is exactly what a process hierarchy is. It's a big domain containing subdomains, containing processes. And you're absolutely right in saying that some functional domains are simply more elaborate than others. And that typically results in having 1 or 2 layers more of subdomains, because why are you using subdomains? At least that's my opinion. Subdomains drive ownership. They define ownership. There are subject matter experts. Let's take finance for an example. In finance, there is a subdomain called accounting. Cool. Within accounting, you probably have accounts payable and accounts receivable. Those are 2 different types of expert groups. And that's why you very often have subdomains for them. And within them are the processes that are owned by the person who owns the subdomain for accounts payable or accounts receivable. And in the end, there's a global process owner. That's all fine. But very often, the actual responsibility is delegated to people that are much more closer to the actual content. So for me, being that dynamically flexible is quite a plus.
Yeah, but and talking about hierarchy, but that's once you've defined the hierarchy, you have your experts in their domains or subdomains. Then and that's what. Let's come back to the topic of granularity. The point is that it's not just about sorting bricks. Let's say these process experts are actually defining the bricks. So well. And we know there's all bricks of different sizes, but they need to fit into whatever model you want to make. So if I want to take that up, so what is happening is there's not just that the people are saying, I've got a load of bricks and I need to sort them. They're actually defining, let's say, the size of the bricks in their domain. And that's where having the picture of, say, I need to have a certain granularity of process so it fits into the overall design of the car you're going to build with Lego. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's where the top-down approach helps, because they know, what am I designing this for? It's not for myself, just to make my life easier, which it is as well. Yeah, that's why they're doing the process documentation. But it's always looking at that I, as a process, any process, acts as a service and has to fit in. Yeah. So and that's where the let's say the subdomain experts, when they're going out to document their processes, they should always be aware of how, in an integrated fashion, not just as an output where you can say, yeah, I have to get my accounts payables done, but they need to understand specifically for the points, for their processes that are, let's say, integrated in end-to-end scenarios, where the interfaces are, the beginning and endings are, and then based on that, they have like I always say they have their boundaries, and within that they can do what they want to, as long as they provide the they say the connectors, the stubs, the input and output connectors for this process to serve in an integrated fashion, and that picture is something that I always and it is not just the Work Showers app, is that you need the hierarchy, you need it fast, you need to get the experts on site. They need to think about their processes generally to be able to engage in end-to-end workshops. So you can't just take somebody who's never done process management, hasn't thought his own processes, and jump into an end-to-end workshop. However,
I agree.
They should have like this portfolio of services in mind, like maybe even on a SIPOC, their key capabilities and activities. They should have that as a registry, without having spent, let's say, months on detailing out and really documenting in a sophisticated model fashion their process. Then end to end, then back to the drawing board, and then tidy up and set the thing. So I think it's you have to think it's a bit of an iterative learning process to get this thing right.
I agree. I just one thing. At the moment that you draft your hierarchy, should be quick and simple. You define your processes. You're going to give creative freedom to the experts. I'm all for that. Completely right. You need to have a sort of a guideline that says this is your definition of what an activity should be in terms of granularity. And the reason for that is that at the moment that you take individual business process and you're going to string them together into an end-to-end process, you don't want to go from a high level of granularity into a low level, high level, low level between the processes that make up the end-to-end. You want to have that predictable consistency that if you are in process number 1 of your end-to-end, your granularity carries over into process number 2, because that increases the readability of the end-to-end process significantly. So I think Autopop is one of those things that you can think of.
Yeah, so we had one topic here that popped up. They said, the naming. They had, let's say, a naming convention.
For what? For the activities or for the processes?
For the processes. And
okay.
And when you and then we did the end-to-ends, and here we tried to be kind of like have a name for the process of what's happening. Let's say create sales order, yeah, and
there we go.
Check credit limit, blah blah blah, and then when mapping out the level, the level beneath, the BPMN, activity like models, the naming didn't fit at all, and the granularity didn't fit at all. I said, that's not, well, for a lot of cases didn't fit at all. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking, and then I thought, so now there's two ways to say, okay, now do we change the end-to-ends? But then you can't read the end-to-end. Or do we change the processes? Then you'd have to, rename them and maybe even, remodel them. But then there was this one idea. It says, who cares? So let's think about what happens if you say, who cares? The experts know when there's an end-to-end and it's linked to, let's say, create sales order is connected to a process called 4.4.2.3 sales order. something like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, and then there the granularity is wrong. But in there, say some of the, let's say, the key activities are mapped out how this happens in maybe HANA. And then, if you want to say cross-check if for an end-to-end test case, you have certain activities that you would execute, you could pick them out then. But then you'd say, but it's so who cares? You have an end-to-end that you could use to understand your integration and stuff like that, and it has its own naming. And in the tool, you just link up some. I'm not saying random; it's the opposite to random. But for an external, it looks like random, and it's who knows if it's right or wrong. But the experts know how to do it, and that's so that would be super pragmatic. Now, what are the arguments why that is a total no-go on the long run? Or do you say, can we live with that?
No. I mean, I'm not a fan of including hierarchy coding in the process name to start with. I'm a fan of capturing it somewhere, but not in the name. I rather have, if you put a code in a name, I rather have it that you do it more on a functional basis than on a hierarchy place. Because I'll give you a simple example. Instead of calling something 1.1.1.3, which might mean I'm in purchasing right now, I'm in purchase ordering, I'm in creating a purchase order process. You might as well take a code, and when I was in my DSM days, we used the Deloitte industry print. And the interesting thing there is that they used a letter number combination to code their processes. So it was P010010. And then I would know the P is purchasing. So I would immediately know I'm in the purchasing area right now. 010 meant requisitioning. 010 meant create purchase requisition. And then that code was simply a little bit more descriptive. However, we also learned that end users don't give a rat's ass about that. They just want to find normal language to search for. So we even went a step further in the DSM days. We also had a three-letter abbreviation in the name to indicate whether this was a company-wide standard or it was a business group specific
global
process.
Common local.
Exactly. Yeah. So we simply put the three letters of the business group or the three letters of DSM in there.
Yeah, if you have that as a suffix, I'm fine. But the prefix is something that kills you because you have like a prefix like that, and then in the publishing you don't see the actual, and then you have the verb that is always create, and then somewhere right this says sales order, and then the end user saying, "Come on, guys."
Yeah. No, I mean you need to be creative with the naming, but ultimately, I would say. If you manage your processes and you document them also with the intention to have end-to-ends, then I would always recommend to make sure that the consistency, the level of granularity across those processes is kind of similar. Doesn't need to be exactly the same. That's very difficult. But you need to think about what do I want? What is one activity? I mean, that's where it starts very often. And then you can decide on what a name of a process should be.
Yeah, but on the activity level, I mean, I always have the impression if somebody has some process there where he says, I want to, for my purpose, I want to capture a lot of manual steps. I mean, not down to the level of you have to click here and click there.
No, that's work instruction.
And I'm also a fan of having it, very similar, so it's readable, and you're not going, say, for one process where create and manage the credit, and that's the activity, and the other one has enter the sales order number, then then fill out this. So you have to find a balance there. However, the needs of process experts and the needs of the domain can differ. And if you go into an area where you're doing the modeling out the activities to help understand, say, an interface or how a workflow should be designed, then going into a more detailed level can be helpful. Maybe you could do it as a side document, as a design specification. So I'm completely with you. Defining what is a process, what is an activity, and finding the fine line between, and also a scenario, and guiding the people through like this process of then finding the balance between too much information and too little information, and so it's insignificant what is in there, and it's not helpful for end users. And here again, the main point is to argue over the purpose, and who is consuming these on a hierarchy, and also on a model level. Who is this for? And people should, experts across the world should always think about not just themselves. Yeah.
Oh, so there we go.
So this is not just for your pure entertainment. and maybe if you say, hey, I've got Alzheimer's, I want to be able to remember my processes sometime. Like I sometimes take notes, and then a year later I'm going, did I write this? Wow, there's a date. What was I? Wow, good thought. Why didn't I take up on that? So sometimes documenting and taking notes is good for yourself. No, but seriously, the main purpose is for others, and what the others require. Are you talking about the system integrator that is to implement it? Are you talking about the rollout team that in 3 years in Brazil needs to understand and argue why you designed the template in a fashion? And that helps a lot. When you get down to the level of also setting up. I'm thinking much about business transformation in the context of these typical,
sure.
And once you get into the steady state of maybe onboarding people to your processes, but even that is relevant for business transformation as well. You need to explain people why things are changing, how things, what their purpose is in this department in the context of the bigger picture. That's what you need to think about, to focus on, and not just your, I need this to get my next, approval or my next test done. You have to think beyond that. And that's when the naming, the renaming, the granularity, the readability of the whole thing becomes and not just your processes, but all processes together should be readable. That's when that really gets a grip.
I think that's a brilliant summary of what we discussed the last 35 minutes.
Time flies.
Time flies. We need to wrap this one up, Russell. But we concluded that process modelers are selfish bastards, pretty much, and they need to think about other people.
Absolutely.
I've been one. I mean, we try to be provocative from time to time, but the creation, the purpose of consumption of process models, or process documentation rather, is something that's not always on the mind, front and center of the people doing the modeling, and that is something that they need to think about. So I think that's a really good conclusion, and keep it simple on the hierarchy part, and make sure that your process models on the same level are consistent with terms of granularity. I think that sums about up what we've discussed, and it has been a pleasure again, Russell.
Yeah,
and we'll be back with more episodes, maybe before summer, or maybe after. We need to check the holiday schedules, but thank you for sticking with us, and we'll catch you next time. Bye bye.
Bye bye.